computing group. He's a research scientist at Meta Reality Labs in Pittsburgh, and his research revolves around generating next generation digital humans, including faces, hands, body, hair, clothing, and more. He has done like significant contributions to the field and published remarkable works like PIFU and PIFU HD. He's also one of the core contributors of Kodak Avatars 2.0. He completed his PhD at USC, and he was a visiting researcher at UPenn before that. And today he'll be discussing his research on human modeling with light. So over to you, Shunsuke.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks for the introduction. And it's a great honor to give a seminar talk in this Brown University. Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So today I'm going to talk about digital human modeling with light. So like I'm going to talk about like how we leverage different kind of lights to enable higher fidelity digital avatar modeling. And as I got introduced, like there's a recent demonstration called the Kodak Avatar 2.0, where like a two-person can are communicating in real time using their own facial avatars. And so like those like rendering is actually what both persons see on the screen in real time, and then they are driven by their own facial expression. On top of that, the avatars has a capability of relighting. So like a user can grab a light torch and then move it around to create a different kind of lighting effect as shown here. And also like I think 1 day or 2 days ago, like there's a new release of Fred Lex Fredman's podcast talking with Mark Zuckerberg using this Kodak Avatar 2.0. So if you haven't checked, please check it out. But this kind of shows that how immersive the communication can be in the digital world. And then our reality lab, especially in our Pittsburgh team, try to push the boundary by improving the fidelity and then making the avatar look like you, sound like you, and move like you. Okay. And here today, I want to argue that the relighting is a crucial a component for immersive communication. Like as you can see, here's a kind of a side-by-side comparison with and without relighting. So if the avatar doesn't match with the environment, then it doesn't look really natural. That with the proper relighting, you feel like the person is in this particular space, and you're really sharing the space. So to improve the immersiveness, I argue that the relighting should be part of this this avatar representation. Okay. So first, I'm gonna talk a bit about how we enable this relighting research from a data and a capture system perspective. So our Pittsburgh lab have developed the capture system called Maxi, which is a multi-view capture system, consists of 160 cameras and 450 lights, and everything synchronized and running at the 90 FPS with individual control of lights. As you can see, as a dynamic sequence, we can collect all the viewpoints at the same time. And as I said, each individual light has a full control, so you can create a different, interesting light pattern. I'm not sure if it's streamed nicely on the Zoom people, but yeah. So now we are basically tweaking the individual lights and then flashing from different directions. So this allows us to build a relightable avatars with the dynamics. Before diving into a more concrete method, I'm gonna briefly talk about what do we want to build at high level. So the first thing, especially for VR or immersive communication, is you want to see the avatar from any viewpoint. So that means basically we want to figure out given the point X from given the light direction, so we want to see the person from different viewpoints. So this aggregates the viewpoints from a different angle of the position. Then on top, if you want to make the avatar relightable, not only just a viewpoint, but also we want to perturb the light direction. So given a single light direction, we want to observe from a different viewpoints, and we want to change the light position and then do the same. And then eventually we get this a light transport tensor, across view and the lighting. This allows us to render the avatar from any viewpoint with any light illumination. But this is not enough for especially avatars, because humans are dynamic, people moves, right? So on top of this lighting light transport the metrics, we have to extend it to the 3D tensor including the state axis. So here state refers to like, for example, pose or facial expression. But like avatar changes like facial expression, and then the appearance also changes. So we want to basically complete this 3D tensor called the light transport tensor. And ideally, what we want from the capture system is to feed the necessary information to complete this tensor. But in reality, it's infeasible because like a time is limited, stretch is limited, and also the number of viewpoints, it's not continuous, right? Like we only have like 160 cameras, and there are many missing viewpoints in between. So like what we get at best is to get this like bunch of holes in this light transport tensor. So how can we build this complete tensor from this incomplete observations? That's a real research question we want to address. And especially for the lighting axis, like people have come up with this time multiplex illumination. Like so the one naive approach to cover different variation is ask participants to like keep the same expression and then rotate the right around, and then keep doing this for different expressions. But the problem is, let's say if you have like a 160 like lights, that means like for each expression, like we need basically like a 460 times more like length of capture, which is apparently infeasible. So our solution is to leverage the neural network and let neural network fill in the gap by leveraging the inductive bias. So even though our observation has some limit, like a bunch of holes in it, like if we cleverly feed that information into neural network can successfully fill in all the missing information. And to overcome this curse of dimensionality about the time, so we propose this time multiplex illumination. So instead of asking the participant to like hold the same expression for a long time, let just the participant move as natural over time. This way, for each timestamp, we can only observe a single light position and the single expression pair. But over the course of like the capture, we can get different combination of light direction and the facial expression. So this way, we can significantly reduce the time of capture. And furthermore, we propose to use a group light. So instead of turning only single lights on at the same time, we can turn on the 5 or like multiple lights on, and the network basically decouple the contribution from each different light sources. This way, basically, we can like further reduce the capture time by 5 times. All right. So there's another problem for the capture system. As I mentioned, humor is dynamic. And the question is, how can we get this state? So like historically in our Pittsburgh lab, we have developed this codec avatar, and then that basically takes a lot of advancement in our classical computer vision techniques, like from key point detection, mesh tracking, non-rigid ICP, and so on. But this all relies on like high resolution, clear images of the person from different viewpoints. So let's see how the relighting capture looks like. So as you can see, like at each time frame, like there's a different lights, light coming from the different direction, and there's a strong shadow on the face. Very likely, half of the face is completely dark, and we can't reliably run the tracking algorithms. So how can we do this? So our solution is to interleave pre-lit illumination. So like, let me show you a bit more clear diagram. So here, every 3 frames, we interleave all lights on, and for the other remaining 2 frames, we insert these partially lit frames. And we use this free lit for the tracking, and for the remaining 2 frames for the relightable avatar learning. And here's the illustration. So this is like a sequence of the capture, but they're showing that every three frames, and every 3 frames we have a free lit, but for the remaining 2 frames, we have those partially lit frames. That we can interpolate the state of tracking to those like partially lit frames to learn the appearance on top of those like tracked results. All right, so that's a kind of like a brief overview of the data and the capture system in your like relightable avatars. So let's talk about the algorithm. So this is our like a 2018 version of the codec avatar, which takes expression code and viewpoint, and then produce a geometry and a view-dependent texture to produce photorealistic avatars. However, this is not relightable. There's no light information coming in. And the naive extension to make the avatar relightable is to inject the lighting code as a part of the input. So for example, we can feed the natural illumination in the form of Lagrange environment map. And for efficiency, let's say we can downsample it to 32 by 62, 32 by 12. And what happens is during the training time, so we have like 5 lights on, as I mentioned earlier, and then it's like changing around. In the test time, basically we want to feed such a natural illuminations. So ideally, like as I mentioned, like our state is kind of partial, but by feeding into the network, it's going to generalize to different illumination conditions. But this is non-trivial. We have to pick a light inductive bias. But the reality is, it's really difficult to generalize, and in the inference time, it does not generalize. So let me show you how it looks. So the problem here is during the test time, with the RE condition model, if we parameterize it as a lateral image, we assume that the light is coming in parallel to the face. But in reality, the light is like only just 1 meter away, and the right direction for each point is varying. So instead of taking this like a light condition as an early input, we propose to provide a local light direction, a bit like similar to this like neural field idea. And this way, we can like render not only from the single light direction, like with a distant far light assumption, but we can also render the person with very close light position, as you can see on the right side. Note that we only capture with this like 1 meter radius dome, so we never capture the person with the light so close, but still the network can generalize to this kind of near field light effect because of the locality of light direction. And another issue is, as I mentioned, like during the training, we take this light stage data where the 5 lights are only on. And in the inference time, we want to provide this continuous natural lights. And what happens is if we train with this like a light stage data and then just feed natural light in the inference time only, it's not going to generalize. It shows like a pretty poor boundary overfitted results. So here, to address this issue, we propose to leverage the additivity of light model. So let me explain how it works. So given the light, the target illumination, we can decompose it as a linear combination over different light sources. This is just a simple math, right? And since the light transport is linear, meaning if there's 2 lights coming in, that 2 light contribution can be separated in a linear way. And also you can linearly add them together to create a new different combination. So if you have an observation for each different point light sources, and we can multiply the same weights for each light color to that captured image, we can produce the person's face under novel illuminations, like I showing here. If I change the target illumination, all you need is just change the relative weights of this light color C0 to Cn to match with this target illumination, and then you can produce the person under natural and new illumination. Even for this kind of extreme, we can do that. Okay. Then in our case, that the OLAD single light capture is not from the real data, but it's produced by the neural network. So as I mentioned, we propose this light conditioned illumination model, and then for each target illumination, the light direction, we just run our network for each right direction and then aggregate together to produce natural illuminations. So this way, even though we only capture the person in this 5 lights on a capture system, then our avatar can be rendered in natural illuminations.
This must be pretty compute intensive because you're talking about hundreds of neural network evaluations, and you need to do this every frame, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's something I'm going to address in a few slides. Okay. Exactly. So that's a really important aspect. So we care about speed, right? We want to use this one avatar, the build avatar, for a real-time telepresence. So we want to use it for a communication, and we want to drive it in real time. And For that, like basically we want to feed the input stream from the headset and then drive this like expression code to create a new facial expression under natural illuminations. So like here's a problem. Like we have to run the network for each light direction and then add them up. This is very expensive because if even for the 32 by 16 relatively coarse illumination representation, it already requires 512 times like a feed like a run like an inference of a feed-forward network. So here's our solution. We call it a student-teacher framework. The idea is the following. As I mentioned earlier, this early condition model representing natural illumination as a whole is fast to render, but it needs a ground truth. It didn't generalize if you train with just light stage data. On the other hand, like the late condition model, as a teacher, generalize really well, but for their inference time, it's very slow to render. So what if we take this rendered results from the teacher model as a pseudo ground truth and then supervise student model? So this way, even though we only capture from light stage data, then we can build a fast rendering model, which can also support natural illuminations. So here's what we mean by teacher-student framework. Here's our demonstration. So if we distillate the teacher model into student without compromising quality much, we can achieve significantly faster rendering. So now with 100 FPS, we can render on a headset. So here's the result. So here's the right driving of the relightable codec avatar from the headset. So we can relight and drive at the same time after the fraction of a computational time, like 100 FPS. Okay, and also it's not really a published work. We combined that relightable avatar model, which was based on the mesh, to the volumetric representation. Now people are more excited about NERF and all kinds of Gaussian study, all kinds of those volumetric representation because it's more flexible and better like modeling after like translucent object such as hair. And we indeed like combine this relightable avatar with a mixture of volumetric primitive, which is kind of NERF variant, but still render in real time. And here's the results. As you can see, even the hair part is nicely modeled, and it can render under natural illumination in a nearly real-time performance. Awesome. So now it seems that the relightable avatar is solved, but it's not really the case. So there's still a lot of missing pieces, and I'm going to talk about a couple of ongoing efforts and some recent work to complete these relightable avatars. So one thing is articulation. Like if you want to extend this like a facial avatar to the full body, the human is articulated. You can change poses and it can cast a shadow from different direction. The articulation, in fact, poses a lot of troubles for the the relightable avatar modeling. And the major challenge is this combinatorial explosion. So if you think about this pose and the illumination variation, it's a basically infinite combination, and it's infeasible to collect all different combination of light direction and the poses. Because if you make a pose, if you change the pose slightly, it's going to cast a shadow on a completely different location of the palette, right? So that's one challenge. And furthermore, for hand, like you often interact two hands or maybe to the object, right? And that also create ambient occlusion and casting shadow on the hand. So there's a much more complex interaction for the hands, and we want to account for this kind of shading or illumination effect, so that it's going to generalize to this kind of novel situation of two hand and hand to object interaction. And our solution is to enable the relighting with a neural network with a physically based lighting features. I'm going to explain what that means. Just before that, I'm going to briefly talk about the dataset. It's very similar to the face. Basically, we do the interleaving capture. So every 3 frames, we interleave fully lit. For the remaining 2 frames, we just turn the 5 lights on, and that's how we train a relightable hand model. Yeah, and then we use this green frame for the tracking, and for this red frame for the learning relightable appearance. And the base network is also shared a lot between the face model and the hand model. The distinction here is we also feed a shadow information as an input, because as I mentioned, like it's really difficult to generate the novel combination of pose and illumination. But if you directly feed information about shadow, the work the network has to do is like much more reduced, and it can just focus on producing realistic appearance on top of this like shadow information. So here's a flip test with and without shadow feature conditioning in as a part of network input. So as you can see, if I flip the ground truth under our rendered output, with the shadow feature, the network can produce a realistic shadow on the hand. This is a good one. And furthermore, it's also going to generate the near field light illumination condition and the novel light direction. As you can see, our model can produce a realistic hand appearance, including some static scattering within this like neural relighting. And if you put the light closer, like I shown on their face case, we can also put the lights very close to the hand, and it still produce a realistic appearance of the hand. And to enable like a fast rendering, as I mentioned earlier, we also like leverage this student-teacher or teacher-student framework here. We take teacher model, this OLAT-based model, to produce like a bunch of pseudo ground truths under natural illumination, and then we basically supervise a fast renderable environment map condition model as a student, and then we can render in real time with the natural illumination. Here's the difference from the face is even for the student model, we compute physically inspired lighting features such as diffuse and specular. If you study computer graphics, those like a diffuse shading, specular shading from phone or like a Lambert is like very easy to compute and fast to render. So we take it as a proxy of a light information, but we also add a visibility on top of it so that it's going to generalize under like novel pose and the light combination. And we feed it as an input to the network to produce a final appearance. So this keeps the real-time renderability that achieve a photorealistic appearance and the generalization to wide range of illuminations.
What was the reason for switching from the low-res environment map to this diffuse and specular feature?
So first, like we didn't use like super high resolution illumination for this one, but hypothetically, we can use like much higher resolution illumination for those features. Like for hand, it's mostly diffuse, but for more mirror-like object, if you feed those like coarse illumination, it's never be able to produce a proper reflection. But if you take it as a feature, that like also produce like a natural reflection.
Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this was not an adaptation specifically for hands. This is just like you feel like this is a better feature representation in general, and you could even go back and do this for faces as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not really specialized for the hand, but we also want to incorporate this visibility information. Like if you just globally take this environment map as a condition, it's non-trivial to inject the information about visibility.
And that's maybe more important for hands than it is for faces.
Exactly.
Occlusions.
Yeah, that's why we are really motivated to incorporate this like a physically inspired lighting features. But yeah, it can be applied to body, face, all kinds of objects as well.
Cool.
And here we achieved real-time performance for this student model and the natural illumination. And here I render two hands at the same time. So as you can see, even for two hands, like the network can incorporate the visibility information from both hands and then produce natural looking appearance under different illuminations.
Sorry, I had a question. For training up the student model, like what order of magnitude data do you generate from the teacher model compared to like the data you get from like the light stage capture?
So like for the light stage data, we have roughly 20,000 frames times basically 150 viewpoints. So in terms of the number of frames, it's very big. For the environment map, this like student training, actually we reduced the rendering significantly because just practically rendering this teacher model takes a lot of time. So like we only rendered roughly like 4,000 to like 6,000 like frames. And the key here is since we take this physically based feature, there's a strong relationship between those local information and the final output. It generates much faster. So if we take this like what we take for the face relighting paper, then it takes much longer time, and it also needs a lot of training data to generalize.
I noticed in this video it says 33 FPS, so this is about 3 times slower than the student model for the head rendering. Is there a sort of a deep reason why it's so much slower, or just use a beefier model?
So I didn't mention that, but actually we changed the underlining like shape representation from mesh to volumetric. So for hand, actually we now use a volumetric.
The last time we saw these numbers was for a mesh render.
Yeah, so that's why it's a little slower.
Yeah.
Is that like a Lisa model, or it's a hand volumetric representation like a Lisa model or some model?
No, it's called the MVP, like a mixture of volumetric primitives, which also came from our lab, and then we also extended that to articulated object. It's called the articulated mixture of volumetric primitive, like and so on, and we basically apply that idea. So the idea is instead of representing the target as a continuous geometry, we treat it as a collection of voxels. So like it's a bit area work of Gaussian splatting. Basically, Gaussian splatting, you take the shape as a collection bunch of Gaussians, right?
Yeah.
But here we take it as a bunch of voxels. So for each voxel, it has like a content, like a 16 by 16 by 16 type of like but they are moving around in a space and gather around the hand region. So it's kind of a leveraging the the efficient rendering because like we only need to query where the voxel exists in a space. But it's more flexible than mesh. So changing topology and so on is nicely supported. So that's the kind of rationale behind the choice of this volumetric representation. Okay, and here's the comparison. So this is basically the re-implementation, the naive extension of the face work to the hand, and without visibility. So it's not going to generate well to natural illumination, and it also requires a lot more training data. Our method with the visibility better like account for the like shading effect, and it's going to generate better on the like leftmost image compared to the one without visibility. And you may wonder like what is the use case of this relightable hand? Of course, we want to create pretty pictures seen on the VR, but this is the only end goal. Like, and we found that the quality of like a synthetic hand is getting so much better. Why don't we use it for like more downstream task about analysis? Well, in particular, like we figured that there, especially for two-hand interaction, there's not much public dataset available. So this is, by the way, like a newly accepted news paper in this year, and we are going to present and also release the data soon. So please stay tuned. But in our previous works like Interhand 2.6M, the diversity of the pose is great, but it's in the lab setup, so the appearance is not diverse, and the illumination and the background is fixed to this like a Mugsy like bunch of point lights, which is far from the real data. And there are other data set called HAC. The identity is limited, and also the illumination is limited in a single space. So like also it looks realistic in the wild, but it's not diverse. And also pose is not also diverse either. And so we introduced this Interhand dataset. This basically leverage our relightable hand work to produce or augment a lot of two-hand interaction with a natural background and a natural illumination. So here's a brief pipeline. Basically, we collect a bunch of two-hand interaction poses from our multi-view capture system. So this gives us a bunch of 3D ground truth poses. But this is not enough, and we combine that with a randomly sampled environment map and our relightable hand, and then composite to produce a lot of natural and realistic looking two-hand interaction. The good thing is we have a one-to-one pair for this like a 2D hand, the 3D hand pose and rendered image. So we can provide actually the perfect ground truth for that. And here's a couple of our synthesized results. As you can see, our target mesh from the manual model and our rendered relightable hand matches with the preval. And you may wonder, like, what's the effect of this like data set? So here's our experiments. So we like created a couple of different training sets, including ours, but also more straightforward approach. Like, what if we just crop the foreground hand and then compose it with a random background with some kind of a style transfer to better match with the illumination? You could, like, instead of synthesizing and rendering a realistic hand, you could just naively compose the hand onto different background. This is another thing we can try. But we've discovered that our rendering, our render data show really strong performance across different data sets, except the interhand 2.6M, which is like only in the studio data. So if you train inside the studio data and evaluate on the studio data, of course it performs well, but it does not generalize to novel illumination. So our method, like, we provide auto pose variation and a natural, realistic looking like two-hand interaction, and this boosts the performance for like in the wild two-hand interaction. All right, so that's a hand part. What else? So another thing I want to talk about is like composability. So like for the avatar, like for hand and face, maybe like just a single model is enough. But in a digital space, you want to change accessory, clothing, and potentially you want to also change hairstyle. And to support this, if you like naively model as a holistic avatar model, it needs like significant number of training data. This is infeasible. So we want to like pursue like the composability in this avatar representation. And this is another like CDPR paper called Megane. By the way, Megane literally means eyeglasses in Japanese. And we luckily came up with this nice acronym. All right, so let's talk about it. So it may sound trivial, but actually it's not. Even for glasses, there's a different topology. So if you look at the different type of glasses, there's some glasses that has two bridges. So it requires a topology change in the shape representation. In other words, you cannot use a single mesh and then just enlarging or like shrinking to produce it. Like, this is not possible. Also, like glass consists of different materials. Some glasses consist of more translucent, like plastic, but others are more like a metal. So if you want to, build it as a generative model, the single model need to represent different kinds of material. This is also non-trivial. And the lens is also, of course, really difficult to deal with. And for that, we propose to leverage flexible representation for shape similar to face, similar to hand. We leverage this for metric representation called mixture parametric primitive. And for appearance, also we leverage neural relighting. I'm going to talk a bit more detail about this like for the glass project. Another thing is since we want to model glass and face together, like we are not interested in just glass alone, but we want to wear it, right? And this actually causes like the geometrically and the photometrically photometrical interaction between glass and face. For example, like if you look at the contact point, there's like applied force, and it causes deformation, right? And also, like if you wear glasses, there's like a shadow casted on the face, as you can see here. So we argue that there are to correctly model this like a non-trivial physical interaction between face and the glasses. We propose to leverage the joint modeling. So we want to see them together. Otherwise, there's no way to really validate and model these two interactions. Okay. So here's a schematic view, and this is a naive implementation composition. You have a glass decoder that can span different type of glasses, and you have a head decoder that can also span different kind of faces. And then just you roughly align the position of glasses and then fit them. Does that work? Not really. And we propose to introduce this interaction layer, interaction decoder, which basically takes information about which glasses you're wearing and which head you have right now, and then produce a residual that should be applied to both face and the glasses on their geometry and appearance to produce the final composition. So this way, we can better model the like interaction of our glasses and head. And I think the same idea can be applied to different combination of objects, not only for just glass and head. And to enable this research, we collect a data set of, I think, 24 person, including myself, with and without glasses. And we ask each participant to have a different facial expression with a different head motion. And importantly, all captures are relightable. So like once we build this nice geometry and appearance model, we can also relight avatar. And here's a progress of this interaction modeling. The leftmost image is a ground truth, and the second left is basically our rendering results. And those are geometric, like a visualization of the intermediate training stage. So as the training goes, the glass shape naturally emerges, and they start modeling the glasses. So we jointly optimize the geometry and the appearance of glasses and the rigid the global transform of glasses. And it works out nicely. And this leads to our like generative glass and the face models. Here I interpolate a face identity and a glass identity, and they're rendered from different viewpoints. As you can see, for this person, the glass has two glitches. A single model can represent actually this like two different topology with a single like a generative model. This is really nice. And you might be curious what actually this interaction layer learns. So let me turn on and off this like an interaction, like especially the deformation layer. So here's a flip test, and please pay attention to the nose area. If I turn on the this like a interaction deformation, it starts to deform the nose to better fit the glasses. If you put the if you lower down your glasses, then the nose part apply pressure onto your nose, and it makes a deformation. To be clear, like our model does not explicitly specify what the deformation should be. It just learned from just the inverse rendering with our interaction layer. I think this is the power of this like a neural flexible representation with this interaction modeling.
What's your geometric representation?
So it's a like mixture of volumetric primitives. So like as I show, in here. So this is basically our geometric representation. So inside each boxes, it has an opacity and the color the same as an NARF. But like we also retain this like explicit correspondence through the motion of primitives. So that's our geometric representation. So like when we apply the delta, that each primitive moves to better match with your image observations.
So I know you mentioned that you're not explicitly computing the deformation, but I wonder if there could be some benefit to actually doing that, because you talked about in the hand case that you used as an input to the system, you had this sort of, you called it physically inspired rendering features. And the fact that you had those as opposed to the low-res environment map meant the network converged a lot faster with less data.
Yeah.
It does make me wonder, I mean, if you did explicitly compute this deformation and use it as some sort of input feature, might you observe a similar behavior in this setting?
Right, yeah, so like I think that's the case. The tricky bit, especially for the deformation, is we have to find out what's the right material parameters and
Yes.
also the what kind of simulator you use, like what's the like material representation. So there are many so there's no really like go-to option for the deformation, and that choice probably leads to even suboptimal performance. So just as a starting point, we go with as flexible as possible. But as you say, yeah, it's possible to incorporate some physics flyer as an input and then let the network figure out the residual. That's probably even better and then show the better generalization. I think that's probably a more scalable solution if you want to go beyond the glasses. But yeah, the choice of those like hyperparameters the material representation is probably a bit non-trivial challenge.
It does sound like kind of a fun project to go out and try to measure the Young's modulus of a bunch of people's noses.
Yeah, we can poke. That would be a really fun project. Yeah, awesome. All right, and then let me briefly also talk about the appearance side. So like we don't not only want to model like the geometric interaction, but also photometric interaction. As I say, the glass casts shadow on the face, and also the face also affects the appearance of glasses, such as the transparency. Like for this kind of really transparent, translucent like glasses, you see the skin color on the face. On the glass through the skin, right? So here, what we take is a shadow similar to the hand project as a feature, and then let network figure out the residual on the appearance. and it also works out nicely, including some translucency and some surface scattering effect. And then here's our flip test with and without this interaction layer. As you can see, compared against the ground truth, adding this interaction layer add a lot of more a reality or a photorealism to this composition. Right. And this allows us to build this interaction-aware, relightable glass model. So this all comes from a single glass model. So you only sample just different light encode. And this gives us a different appearance of the glasses. For the middle one, let me play it once again. It makes the light coming from the back. For the middle glasses, you see a lot of surface scattering effect. For other glasses, which made of metal, you see a more glossy reflection. And you don't need to specify whether roughness and translucency and so on. And it doesn't need any expensive path tracing. It's just going to generalize and just use sample, use latent code. It just produces a bunch of realistic glass rendering. And what's really cool and my favorite part of this project is a lens insertion. So in fact, so far, a lot I've talked about is only the eyeglass plane, not really including lenses. And then one of the reviewers even argues that, oh, this is not an eyeglass project, it's just a frame project, and we should change title. But actually, the good thing about our representation is it's a hybrid, explicit implicit representation. So we retain rough correspondence through this position of primitives, and then on top we have this volumetric representation, right? And that's shared across different classes. So if we do some semi-automatic way to figure out where the lens should be, as shown in the middle, we found that actually it's pretty trivial to render to properly incorporate refraction and reflection of lenses because it's all physical. So given the prescription you have, we can just figure out how much bending you get through the refraction and also in the reflection. So the only change in the renderer is the two things. You first detect where your ray hit. If it hit on the lenses, you compute two rays. One is refraction, and the other is reflection. For everything else, you just do the same as an R. Okay. And here's our results. So to be clear, our capture data has no lenses as a part of capture process. But we can as a post process, we can still render the glasses with a different prescription. And here is a rendering. Oh, oops, it's not coming yet. Yeah. Those are all synthetic rendering. Okay. And by basically changing the reflection time, we can also simulate sunglass kind of a cool effect. Right. So a bit of brief summary. So digital human modeling with light. So one thing is if you enable dynamic relightable capture, not a static scene, then we need to come up with a new capture system and also new data collection scheme. And we in particular propose a time multiplex group lights to combat the cost of dimensionality. And we also propose a free lit interleaving so that we can do the tracking for the free lit frames and the interpolate in between. And in terms of the learning or algorithm side, the takeaway message would be to leverage the correct inductive bias. As I mentioned earlier, if you use the neural, a physically based lighting feature, it's going to generalize, and also it requires much less training data. So such kind of physically inspired feature often give you a better generalization. And also for compositional modeling, we have to combine this kind of physically based features together with these interaction aware layers. Right. And let me briefly touch on a bit of a extension of this a glass work. So for that, we use a high quality multi-view capture system with a lot of script and a lot of annotation and key points. This is really difficult to scale, and we are looking for more scalable way to build this compositional modeling. And this is a new ICCP work in collaboration with Seoul National University. They're led by Hanbyo team. It's done by his student, and So the idea is it's really difficult to collect this kind of composition across different identities. But if you pay enough, maybe one person, you can just ask them to wear just different type of clothing and different accessories. So like we propose to just propose a simple change in this capture. So like for just single person, we ask person to get captured with and without object. And we do this for like a different material, like different object like backpack, outwear, scarf, hats, and so on. And then you may think for the occupancy, since we have a capture of with and without object, why don't we just apply this arithmetic? If you just subtract the person's occupancy from their with object to without, we get their object model. That's it. Well, it's not really the case because human part is dynamic and also not identical. So we propose to leverage the power of generative modeling. So the key idea is the following. So we basically model this like a human part of generative modeling without object. And then we also model the generative model for the object as a next step. So once we freeze this human side, we are only going to optimize the latent space. So it's not going to deviate too much from what's learned without object. And they try to absorb any measurement error with the object because as I mentioned, the state and the pose would be slightly different when you wear object. And then we add a neural composition module, which takes an intermediate feature from the human module and the object module to produce the final output. So just a key takeaway here is even if you have a limited resource, you just collect the data for the single person with and without object. And by getting the power of this 3D generative modeling, you can still absorb the error and then build a composition model. And then in the test time, we can just simply switch the generative model for different subject. And then we can put the learned object onto different person, as you can see here. And here's the results, the same scarf for different person. And also we can put their different backpack on the person. I think the results are still preliminary, but they're basically coming up with a better script. Like instead of coming up with a cool algorithm, if you just make a small modification in the capture, this also drastically change the difficulty of compositional modeling. That's probably one key takeaways of useful for different projects as well. All right. So how much time we have left? Okay, we have 9 minutes. So it's not actually the end of the talk. So far, I've talked about the digital human modeling with visible light. What about invisible light? That's something I wanna touch on in the end of the talk. So in particular, this is very critical for hair. For 3D hair reconstruction, this is still an open question. There are a lot of challenges. And the major challenge here is the hair interior is not observable in a visible light spectrum. So we want to model different kind of hair from the root to the tip, like for each strand, but you cannot see even the root, the scalp of the person, right? So this is not really you have to rely on some plier, but it's a chicken and egg problem, right? If you don't see it, you have to hallucinate, but there's no easy way to validate. What if you just see through it? So our key idea is the following. So so this is a new SIGGRAPH paper this year called CT2 hair. I think title explain everything, but so we basically leverage the X-ray. So X-ray can pass through the entire hair, okay? And then if you do this from all around, you can actually build their high quality density volume, including the interior. So we send a bunch of the hair wig to the vendor. Typically, actually, some people say, oh, our lab don't have this high quality, super expensive CD, but it's okay. Actually, there are many vendors even inside the US that actually take your object and they scan and then send it back to you with this density volume, and that's what we did. So even in our academic lab, I think this is something you can do. Each costs $300 or something. It's not too crazy, right? And this is a raw density volume you can get. Unfortunately, I cannot show the interior here, but you can see the high resolution of the density volume. But again, this is not the end of the project. we find that also from the coarse look, it looks pretty nice. But if you do the zoom in, there are a lot of noise. It's basically inherent noise in a CT scanner because there's a vibration, and also the reconstruction algorithm in CT has some like sensitivity to noise. So you can't fully resolve all the strand to strand level reconstruction. And in fact, more classical like a double filter to extract orientation field doesn't work for the CT data. And then we are inspired by our like vector calculus. The key idea is the following. So if you want to estimate the orientation O, and if you take a derivative of the density, then it's always perpendicular. And we just solve it as an eigenvalue problem, and we can extract the orientation out of it. And this, compared against the double filter, produce much more coherent and accurate 3D orientation. And on top, we do the cost to fine optimization. So we start from this like a density volume, assign orientation field, and then classify it to figure out the more reliable like hair strands. And then we make sure that each strand goes from the root to the tip, and we do the filtering. That way we can get the coarse but reliable hair strands. And on top, we do the population using neural interpolation, and then do the refinement to better conform with the density volume. If you're curious about more detail of our implementation, please check out our paper. And here's our final reconstruction of strands. As you can see, our method is robust. It supports a wide range of hairstyles in a fully automatic way to produce root to tip strand reconstruction. And the good thing about this root to tip strand representations, it can be used for physics-based simulation or physics-based rendering. So it's a more like production-ready reconstruction of hair strands. And we do the comparison against the like state-of-the-art image-based reconstruction method from a single view or merged view. For the like a single view method, it does reasonable estimation of our hair structure. But if you look at those strand level, it misses a lot of correct curvature and the correct shape of a hair strands. And the dense multi-view method, this line-based multi-view stereo paper, does in fact produce highly accurate hair strand for the visible area, but it completely misses interior. And to fill in the interior, you have to rely on some plier or hallucination, which is not always reliable. In contrast, our work different for each type, each hairstyle, we can still produce highly plausible and root to tip hair strands. All right, so let me conclude my talk. So beyond this like a visible light spectrum, we can also see through and then tackle occlusion. So if you're like if you have hard time dealing with occlusion, why don't you just see it? And the one idea is to leverage invisible like a light spectrum. This way, your program could be much more tractable. And more importantly, we release code, model, and data. So if you want to play around with this super high resolution density volume, please check it out. Unfortunately, I couldn't cover like neural field, like this strong connection me and the Brown University about this neural field because James, Srinas, and I and others worked on this neural field stuff. I believe this CT2 hair, this line work really go well with neural field. So if you're really excited about this direction, please grab the data and the code and then try out your idea. All right, so that's all for my presentation. Thanks for listening.
We have a few minutes for questions. People have some.
Yeah, so I was interested in the place where you were generating objects and human pose. And over there, I was seeing you modeled the human as a code, and then you would optimize just the object and then match it. Yeah, you passed.
Is it this one or?
No, the next one, where these all work.
Oh, the ICCB paper?
Yeah, this one. Can you go to the generator?
Yeah.
Yeah, so here, do you have in sync without object and with object videos over here? Because I'm not sure how it's getting the pose of the human.
Yeah, so pose is actually a pre-process. Like we don't jointly optimize poses,
Okay.
but from the so we have a Kinect basically, the multi-view Kinect, and from there, like whether it's with object or without, we can do a triangulation to find out the 3D pose. So 3D pose is given a priori
Okay.
from just off-the-shelf tool, but there's the remaining what's neat on top. That's something we try to figure out as a part of training process.
Okay, just one thing to clarify. Do you have the same synced image or
No, so that's a like key challenge. So like for the with object and without, we don't have an identical pose.
right?
That's why we first distillate those without object scans into this generative model.
Okay.
And we freeze the decoder and then only just optimize the latent pose when
Okay,
you try to fit with object.
I see.
That way, like this model doesn't explain too much.
Mhm.
Like the human model doesn't explain too much about, like the object area,
Mhm.
and the object model try to learn the residual in the form of like a interaction layer or the object.
Yes.
It is
Probably most like a philosophical question. So do you have a metric on how realistic things should be in order for you just to say, hey, this is good enough, let's go to the next step? Because I mean, you know about the Canny Valley. I don't know on what point you could say this is realistic enough.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So like our premise is like unless we really like measure it, we can't really validate this. So like the first, like we have to use a quantifiable metric to do this, and the only true observation is our raw pixels. So like if you try to like best reconstruct our like the observation, that's getting closer to this photorealistic representation. That's a kind of what we are aiming at. When this meets our quality bar, this is something we don't know yet, and I think it's just discovered throughout more like a deployment. So like the great thing about being in a meta is we are pushing for this like a telepresence. So once things are released to the public, then we'll find out like where we actually care like about the quality. Maybe certain things we pay attention to, maybe people don't care. Like the shadow on the from the glasses may or may not people notice, right? So those things like we don't know, and that's gonna be a very interesting things to figure out down the road. Yeah, that doesn't answer to your question.
I think it's way too subjective, but yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for a great talk. The avatars look really great, photorealistic and well, but it seems like your methods rely a lot on your capture, right? On the way you capture the data. You have to sample it a lot. You just said that you want to release this to general public at some point. So for that, I guess not every person has this system for capturing.
Right.
Right. So are you exploring other means of capture that would require less data?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, we also believe that that's not a feasible choice to bring everybody into our bulky capture system. But what we hope is that kind of bulky capture system give us a sufficient flyer about building high quality avatar, even for unseen subjects from this capture data set. And a more lightweight capture system like just phone capture would be sufficient for normal person to build a complete 3D representation. So like that's something we are pushing, and also like last year we published a paper in SIGGRAPH, which basically built a not like same level but close like a level photorealism, like that kind of avatar can be reconstructed from just a phone scan. So if you haven't seen, please check it out. So like we already started working on that direction. And I think we believe we need a high quality data as a flyer together with limited amount of observation from those like from normal users. So that's I think the way to go to build a high quality avatar for everyone.
Yeah, I was wondering for the glass paper. For when you detect like the lens position, is that done manually?
Yeah, so like I think so there are a couple of points, like few points, like their intern did like manually, like 4 points, and then for everything in between, it's just basically do the linear interpolation, project to the process primitive, and then do this. So it's a bit like a subdivision to conform better on the contour, and that works surprisingly well. So like we need it only for single glasses. As I mentioned, like across different glasses, it shares the same set of primitives. They can move around to represent different topology, but overall they share the same location. So like once you do this detection, for single glasses, that can be propagated to all different classes. But there's a bit of manual, like annotation. Any question from Zoom or let's